House Appropriations Subcommittee on Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Cavett.
Here.
Representative Morton.
Here.
Representative Markkinen.
Here.
Representative Steckloff.
Present.
Representative Price.
Here.
Mr. Chair, all 5 members of the subcommittee are present. A quorum of the subcommittee is present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Rep. Markkinen will approve the minutes for March 4th. There being no objections, the minutes are approved. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. We have a presentation today by Adam Wygant, Director of Geological Services and Management Divisions for EGLE. If the director would like to deliver his program, welcome. We're glad you're here today.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Travis Boskell, Deputy Director with the agency. Budget lives in my world, so hopefully I become a familiar face here over the next couple months. With that, I will stop talking and leave it to Adam, who's our expert. He's going to walk you through his division and all the services that they provide to the state.
Good afternoon, Chair Cavett, representatives. It's an honor to be here today to give you a division overview of the Geologic Resources Management Division. Don't get attached to that name. We do change that name like every few years, but if I could have the next slide. I would first draw your attention to our mission statement here, and I start with this because while our mission fits inside of EGLE's mission, I feel like our division dealing with geologic resources and extractive industries have some particular dynamics that maybe some other groups don't, in the sense that we regulate industries that have significant property rights involved. Extractive industries need mineral rights, which is a dominant state of real property, even over surface rights. And in the water use world, there's significant case law and common law and riparian rights at play that dictate the paramount right to reasonable use of water, surface water and groundwater. So this is a strong doctrine that's only really been modified by about 20-year-old legislation that was enacted for large volume water withdrawals, and that was in order to meet some of our Great Lakes governors and premiers compact commission requirements when they were concerned about diversions taking water away from our Great Lakes. And then also a recognition that even though we have plentiful water in our state, there is areas that it's not infinite and you can exhaust it. You can overpump areas and have saltwater intrusion. You may have wells dry up. So that's all that to say that these extractive industries have an extra sense of balancing real property rights and conservation. You know, when we talk about like minerals, we have to think about conservation in the sense of, yes, we need these minerals for society right now, and we also need to think about the future, and we're always mindful of the wanton waste that occurred during the lumbering era. It's actually in early preambles of our oil and gas statute. So people do have the paramount right to develop their minerals, use water, so long as we're protective of public health, safety, and the environment. Our division is a small division of about 76 people. We're 40 in Lansing and about 36 distributed through the field. We're almost purely geologists from our technical staff, but we also have petroleum engineers and a couple other scientists, and we're supported by like just an awesome administrative team of budget people, secretaries, administrative assistants, things that keep us in line and keep things flowing, keep track of budget. That's important. I would say about our team that we heavily invest in training because our folks, while they don't respond to hazardous instances, hazardous environments can envelop around them. They're out on oil and gas sites, so they can be exposed to hydrogen sulfide gas, methane, things like that, and they work in a highly technical field. Next slide. With this slide, I just want to point out that our division's easily responsible for 15 plus regulatory programs that are in enacted statutes dealing with the extractive industries. It ranges from oil and gas to gas storage, a number of different kinds of disposal wells, gas storage caverns, mineral wells for over 100 years. We've been extracting deep salt water from underneath Michigan to take out cations that society needs, magnesium, things like that. Lithium is now being investigated. And then also large volume water withdrawals, as I mentioned. So we also regulate our mining. I don't want to leave out our mining. We regulate sand dune mining and have done so since the 70s. Again, recognizing that the Great Lakes Barrier Dunes were a special ecosystem and that there was grandfather rights to mine those, but eventually we would get away from mining those resources, and I'll get into that in a little bit. We also regulate the oversee work on our iron mines. Michigan has 2 iron mines, one's active and one's idle. Minnesota has 5 or 6, so nationally Michigan and Minnesota figure pretty prominently in that mining world. And then also non-ferrous or non-iron mines. Michigan has the only primary nickel mine. You're also probably aware that we have, since the 1860s, mined copper, nickel, zinc, gold, silver, and so our agency oversees those statutes to ensure that, again, they're done in a way that we're not creating a negative legacy. The statute that's probably one of our biggest programs, is our biggest program, is the oil and gas statute. We've had over 60 wells developed in Michigan, drilled in Michigan for oil and gas. Really since the 1800s. We began regulating that industry in the late 1920s, so we have one of the older environmental statutes that the agency oversees. And one thing that I want to note is that we regulate things cradle to grave with respect to the oil and gas industry, and you can kind of see that oil and gas just doesn't occur just in one part of the state. You see that red arc across northern Michigan. That's an Antrim gas play that was developed largely from 1995 to, say, 2006, and there's still work there, but that's an aging group of about 11,000 wells that were hydraulically fractured and provide a significant amount of natural gas for the state. Then you'll see that there's other plays that have developed over time, but they really are scattered across the state. When I came to then DEQ, but this organization, this division 13 years ago, I would say when we did talks out there, we were doing hydraulic fracturing talks, and I would talk about the fact that we babysit 21,000 wells. And in working with the industry over the last 13 years, through them plugging and getting rid of wells, we'll talk about orphan wells too. Currently, we have more on the order of 3,700 oil wells, 9,000 gas wells, 2,000 gas storage wells, and we are the largest, the state with the largest working gas storage capacity in the nation. And our injection wells for disposal of oil and gas related fluids and enhanced oil recovery, we're at about 1,040 wells, and we were at 1,300. So all that to say is I think it's notable that in working with the industry to make sure that cans aren't being kicked down the road, I can look back over the last 13 years and see that we've seen about a 24% reduction in those wells. And then that also doesn't include the wells that have been brought back to economic life through enhanced oil recovery and other things. So our goal there is not to promote the industry or drive it out of business. It's just to make sure that it's being done properly. I want to take a moment and just give you a sense of something that changed my world quite a bit in June of last year. Oil, gas, and minerals program has always been involved with managing data for the last many decades related to those 60 wells, and the department received ITIF fundings to do a $7 million groundwater database. Oh, did I skip a slide?
Yeah, you did.
Well, skip ahead and then we'll go back. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go back to, well, it is on orphan well. All right. I don't know where my slide went on this, but the point is when a company is no longer solvent or we can't find a responsible party for an old oil and gas well, or it's an emergency situation and the operator's not stepping up, we have Part 616 orphan well program since the 1990s, where our division can swing into action with pre-approved vendors that we keep, and we plug that well properly, and we can clean up sites. That's funded through the oil and gas severance tax. There's 2% or $1 million a year goes to that state orphan well program and has since the 1990s. And with that funding, we've plugged about 400 wells, like 396 wells. I don't know the exact number, but it's very close to 400. By 2015, we had that orphan well list almost down to nothing. But you'll remember in around 2015, gas prices fell. There was economic impacts to the oil and gas industry, and there was some companies that went belly up, and then there was also some companies that the state had to take action in. That resulted in our orphan well list blossoming from about 15 wells up to about 500. And at the same time, the states have been advocating since 2007 and 2018 on a national level for some assistance in plugging wells, because while we have, a few wells on our list or 500, there's states like Pennsylvania that have hundreds of thousands. It's a big issue. And with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there was a federal investment in helping states plug orphan wells on state and private lands, as well as federal, but we run the ones that are on state and private land. And so you'll see there's 3 different tranches of money the state has participated in and is participating in to address about 540 wells or sites. And we received $25 million initial grant. We're chewing our way through that. We plugged 220 wells that first year. We received last year $5.8 million in a formula grant that we continue to work on. And then we also have an application in for a $5 million matching grant. And since this is budget, the legislature made the investment to give $5 million ongoing to match that federal grant, but Department of Interior has been very slow in setting that up. So we now have 2 years of appropriation continuing, so we're waiting. We had hoped in January we'd get approved for this so we can get going on that work, doing $10 million a year program. So we're very hopeful to use that over the next 5 to 6 years. And then ultimately there's going to be another tranche of money that the Department of Interior has not yet issued guidance on. They're still working on it. I would note that this last year in the federal program, we were very excited. The first year we addressed like 200 plus sites, but then the Department of Interior put some additional requirements on these other tranches of money related to Endangered Species Act and National Historic Preservation Act, and that slowed our work to where we only addressed about 20 some sites last year, 25 sites. So we're hopeful that's going to break loose this year. They're working on streamlining things. We have contractors in place. We're trying to comply and get sites cleared, but it's been very frustrating. Would like to have better news to report on the last year. Hope I'll have better news for you next year, be able to brag about that. But that first year of doing 240 sites compared to 30 years we addressed 400 sites, you can get a sense of the magnitude of the amount of work that we've done over the last 2 years. I would just note that if anybody's from, I don't know that we got anybody from West Michigan, but this was an example of us swinging in a few years ago. This is a hotel and a convention center, ice rink in Muskegon, Michigan, and they were building a convention center linking the two, and they discovered a well from the 1870s from the lumber baron era 30 inches from the foundation of this building, about 50 feet from the air handler exchange. And we were able to come in there in short order with folks working around us. Is not ideal with methane and working down in those conditions. This drill rig had to be modified to do that job, but we were able to come in there with orphan well funding and some RRD emergency response funding and get that project back on track and plug that well. Now water withdrawal. All right. So as I was saying, in June of last year, we were receiving funding to do a large groundwater database that would support a better understanding our groundwater resources in the state of Michigan. I also serve as a state geologist. That's one of the statutes in that 16. And so I work closely with the Michigan Geologic Survey at Western, and I continually stick my nose in groundwater issues around the department. Been tried to elevate that topic. We established a groundwater technical team, and then when the department was looking for a house of the groundwater data management system, we had a long success story with the oil and gas data, and so it was decided that we would build a groundwater data unit, and then with that, the water assessment unit that used to be with Water Resources Division, it made sense that they're a principal user of the groundwater data. So the concept was that we would create a section, we would elevate this to a section over a unit. It would contain two units, and it would elevate our approach to groundwater and water withdrawal assessment. So it now resides right under me. We've put in place a section manager who's intended to be a principal voice of groundwater in the state of Michigan. She's a modeler, very, very technically competent, and leading our program into the future. So that section now includes the Water Use Management Division, Water Use Management Unit, or Water Use Assessment Unit that was largely like it was in WRD. With the exception that the new section manager has pulled out the modelers and put them in the groundwater data unit because it makes sense to have those modelers under her mentorship and working closer with the data. So that's been a 9-month sprint or wherever we are, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those improvements in a second. Water withdrawal assessment process, I just want to on a high level because we can do a whole presentation on water use, but the tools that we have is we have a water withdrawal assessment tool where folks can go in and do a registration to do a large volume water withdrawal, and if that tool indicates that they're full go, they can register it right there. If it indicates that there may be an adverse resource impact, then they can request a site-specific review. So we could go into that level, and then also if you're over 2 million gallons per day or 1 million gallons per day withdraw in a zone C, which is approaching that adverse impact, you're required to get a Part 327 permit. And then we also can, beyond that, get involved with issue resolution, as you can imagine. This slide is just to kind of highlight the work we're doing. Again, that top schematic is indicative of the groundwater data management system that we're doing. We're bringing all these disparate resource databases into one powerful tool and place where modelers, researchers, and the tools that we use can be easily accessed, transparent, public, open. The slide in the middle bottom, that's a slide kind of referencing a big project that we're doing currently, establishing a Michigan hydrologic framework. All of this is feeding into and working with work that the Michigan Geologic Survey is doing in remapping our superficial geology. On the far left, you see like our old geologic maps of Ottawa County and the kind of level of detail that we had, decades old, versus using new tools like LIDAR and rotoscopic drilling. You can see the new geologic maps that are being produced, giving us a better understanding of both surface and subsurface geology, and that'll help work in concert with this so we understand 3D architecture of our aquifer systems better. And then coupled with monitoring networks, we have a better idea in 3D or in real time of how our aquifers are doing, which then again helps us make good science-based decisions on the site-specific reviews and permitting decisions. I would note the work of our underground injection, storage, and carbon management section. These folks have historically been underground injection, so disposal wells, solution mining for salt, pulling out mineral brines, again, to take out specific cations, and then And then also the underground natural gas storage. So we have many, many fields, probably roughly about 50 underground storage, natural gas storage fields around the state that we co-regulate with PHMSA, our federal partner, and the Public Service Commission. So the Public Service Commission and EGLE, we have a certification program where we're allowed to do the inspection and enforcement on the intrastate natural gas storage facilities, and PHMSA maintains principal authority with the interstate. And it works well with our oil and gas program. That's another level of oversight on gas storage. I would say this top right box is just indicative of how the workload of this group's changing. There's a lot more going on with carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration as industries are trying to decarbonize. We're seeing emerging things that don't fit well in our normal regulatory boxes, like compressed air energy storage, pumped underground storage, hydropower, like using our mines in the UP, old mine workings to potentially create, if you're familiar with Ludington, the pumped hydro storage, pump it up under low demand and spin it down through turbines. Michigan Tech's doing a lot of work, and we're thinking about like where this fits and how we deal with it. And then geothermal is a category of wells, closed loop geothermal around the state. They're one of the only groups that can drill deep wells or borings through our freshwater into other zones, and there's really not a regulatory space for them. We still have our base load that I explained to you with hazardous and non-hazardous disposal wells, that sort of thing. So it's just changing with hydrogen and any number of things. Our weekly meetings with companies and things have gotten very interesting of late. Again, just to highlight the iron mining in the UP, you'll see in the Marquette-Ishpeming area, Cleveland Cliffs operates the Empire Mine, or Tilden Mine is active mine, and then also their Empire Mine is idled since about 2015. And then up above Marquette and to the west, we have the active EGLE Mine and Humboldt processing mill. And then we also have permitted mine at Copperwood over west of Ontonagon in the Porcupine Mountain areas. And you also see the White Pine Prospect. The White Pine Mine had active mining for over 100 years, served us well through a couple world wars and American Industrial Revolution, but was closed in 1996, and it has remaining lifespan with this White Pine North project that we expect to see some permitting on in the coming years. Sand dune mining, as I said, was established, began being regulated in the 70s with the intent to protect our coastal barrier dunes, and it's done that. So we've regulated over, well, about 40 sites since that time, and you'll see that we're down to about 7 regulated sites, the classic barrier dune sites, 1 in the UP, up in Brevort, and then scattered down along the lake shore. What we're seeing more now is more smaller mining sites that are still within 2 miles of the lake shore, but not in that classic dune complex. So I think that statute from the 70s is largely acting as it was intended to protect barrier dunes, but still recognize those property rights. I want to highlight interesting thing. The one building the EGLE owns is our Upper Peninsula Geologic Repository. The legislature gave us funding around 2018 to move our core repository from Harvey outside of Marquette to a new location because it was becoming unsafe where it was. And we were able to rehab this building, and we opened, unfortunately, during COVID during 2020, so it was kind of a soft go live, but this is an important repository. It's one of only 2 repositories in Michigan. The other one is at Western Michigan. And so a lot of exploration mining companies would start their work here with this collection. It's also valuable for understanding groundwater resources. Exciting thing this year is that Michigan Geologic Survey staff are also now co-located at this facility. So we're pleased to see that activity. Exploration had slowed down for quite some time, but I think this is proving out to be what we thought was a pretty valuable resource. in the Upper Peninsula. Just want to hit quickly on concepts is, you know, our orphan well progress has already been highlighted, and I'm hoping for better years to come. You know, you can sense the frustration I had with the last year with some requirements, but we're navigating those the best we can. It's a generational opportunity to address these legacy sites, so we don't want to squander it. Water use assessment improvements, again, that's like a whole nother presentation, and I think I might get that opportunity in the near future to talk about our water use improvements. We're very excited about it, and I'm excited to tell that story. Active well management might not be apparent to you, but last year in 2024, I issued a supervisor of wells instruction outlining active well management, where we increased bonding requirements on blanket bonds. No longer could you have an unlimited amount of blanket or wells on a blanket bond. It would be limited to 100. And also the concept that we would meet with companies on an annual basis to work through what they had. They would lay their cards on the table, and we would lay ours on the table, all with the intent of not kicking the can down the road, so that plugging liability is not just pushed out. We're seeing good success with that. Industry continues to plug about 200 to 300 wells a year. And again, I noted, like, I've seen that 24% reduction in my 13-year career with EGLE. And, you know, that really comes from like that 200 wells a year that industry is out there plugging. And then to an additional point, us addressing some orphans. One big accomplishment is the establishment of a groundwater monitoring network that will feed that data. The USGS has had a groundwater monitoring network in Michigan before, and they're still an important partner, but we're trying to think about that network as a Michigan asset under our control, because federal funding and priorities can undulate. So the fact that we're able to build that network out and have that more under our direction long-term and feeding this database and the tools that come from that is our intent there, and that's going well. I already talked about the data management system and the improvements to the water use program, and the other thing that I would highlight is we also received a grant in this last year called the Methane Emission Reduction Program. That's about a $5 million grant to help companies with marginal conventional wells plug those wells, and so we're actively working on getting that out for nominations. Companies will be able to nominate, we'll prioritize, and issue grants to those companies or plug their wells, depending on what they'd like to do. We're also received a $1.9 million grant, to which we already have appropriation to spend, and that's to pursue Class 6 primacy for carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. We continue to see a lot of interest from companies talking to us about projects in the near to midterm, you know, basically the next 12 to 20 years that involve carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. That brings me to priorities, and I'll shut up, and we can talk about what you guys want to talk about. You know, I always put maintain current regulatory protections because we have these flashy things that are always going around, but the bread and butter of protecting public health, safety, and the environment, and keeping these extractive industries able to do what they do, keep them out of the news, and folks safe. That's still our primary mission, and what I'm committed to. I mentioned we're pursuing Class 6 primacy, working with stakeholders on that. The water withdrawal assessment tools, top priority, continue to improve that, get the orphan well program back going, maximize the value of that federal funding, don't squander it. The data management system that I've mentioned several times, and then the emerging needs is really abandoned mine lands in the UP is something that we worked on a couple years with Representative Cambenzi. We continue to do that. We just filed for a grant this last week with the Department of Interior to do inventory work. So we hope to continue to work on that, and the federal government is trying to get hard rock mining funds available where we could work on project shovel-ready type jobs in the UP, for which we do have some. Hydrogen, compressed air, energy storage, geothermal. Critical minerals is a big thing. Figuring out how we're going to deal with critical minerals that might have been left behind in mine waste, for example. We might have an opportunity to think through how things that were left because they were a lower grade and considered waste at one time or just purely overlooked at one time could be extracted from waste piles and tailings basins. So we've got the core stuff and lots of new things floating around. With that, thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Director. Much appreciated. It was very informative. Do any members have questions? Rep. Borton.
Thank you, Chair Cavett. Thank you, Director Wygant. Appreciate your presentation today. How does your division interact with wells and development on the state land and the DNR?
So we meet with them regularly just to keep up relations both with like Forest Resources Division and also the Mineral Management section. They're kind of separate by design. They're land stewards and stewards of the mineral rights, and we're again primarily concerned that the operation of those wells, they're drilled, operated, and abandoned properly. So we do work with them. Sometimes they need to ratify agreements, and again, that's kind of a civil matter between parties. So we're more on the peripheral, but we do engage in those kind of areas too. And then them being land managers, we have to manage the their expectations that they may have, as well as our current regulations that EGLE has on our books for those same lands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Rep. Price.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in and teaching us about what you do. It sounds like you have a really impressive team, especially grateful for the work that you do supervising wells and responding to them the way that you do. My question is, in your opinion, what would happen to oil and gas operations in Michigan if EGLE has no funding for staff or programming?
So first of all, thank you for, you sense my excitement. It's easy to come and brag about our team. I'm very proud of our team. I'm a geologist, so I'm a little bit partial and biased there. But, with the oil and gas industry, the mining industry, and then some of the industries that I've noted, like geothermal, that maybe don't have regulation, I think regulation serves a purpose to, hold the honest, keep them honest, whatever the saying is. And with most groups that you deal with, whatever the topic is in society, it seems like there's always that 5-10% that's going to create you the most workload. So I think our division does that. I mean, we work and keep standards high that are in our regulations, ensure that they're done. And then I think, again, that kind of keeps it out of the news because it sort of sets a level playing field, and you don't have someone coming in operating at a substandard level and then leading to environmental degradation, impacts to public health and safety.
One thing I'd like to add to that, Representative, and it's true of Adam's division, it's true of all the divisions in the department. There's a mixture of funding sources that come in to fund the work that the department does, right? So you heard Adam talk quite a bit about a lot of these one-time pots of federal funding that he has. Do you have ongoing federal funding for your program? Do you happen to know?
No, it's
Yeah,
year in, year
yeah.
out grant
Yeah.
funding.
You'll see it in some of our other programs where we're federally delegated, that there's federal funding, right? The feds set up the framework at the national level. We assume and we implement at the state level. We're better at it than the feds are. I'll say that clearly, and I think most stakeholders would agree with that. There are fees paid by industry for the regulation, right, for that service. So Adam talked about the surveillance fees, both on oil and gas, surveillance tax on mining. That pays a portion of the program. And then there's general fund that also pays for a portion of the program, right? And that construction of funding of the feds paying us for the work that we do based on federal laws, industry paying their freight or a portion of the freight of the regulation that they receive from the department, and then the general taxpayer also paying some of that, essentially for the benefits received by us protecting those resources. You see that across. So, those fees that I talked about, those are all in statute, right? Those are going to keep getting paid in. Obviously, the committee has the authority, in appropriations, the legislature has the authority to tell us how much of those fees that we're allowed to spend, but we inform you on how much is coming in and how much it costs to run the program. General fund will vary year to year, but there's an established baseline to support that baseline of service that we do through that program. Thanks.
Rep. Markkinen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you both for being here today. Where is the core storage facility?
We're in Gwin.
Oh, in Gwin,
We had a
okay.
building donated to us on the K.I. Sawyer property, and then the $1 million that the legislature gave us to find a building
Okay.
or rehab a building. So we're in pretty Spartan conditions, but we're still very happy with it, and we're making progress on that. So we have office space in the front and a 43,000 square foot warehouse. To give you an idea, Alabama and even what Western's going through, a facility like that is easily $9 to $13 million to do. So again, we're very thankful for what we have, and I welcome anybody to come up. I've shared this with Senator Casperson and others too. Unfortunately, we kind of opened up during COVID, so we had kind of a soft go live, but we love showing the facility off if you're in the neighborhood of Gwin.
Is it at the old K.I. Sawyer base? Okay.
Yep.
And one other thing, the gay stamp sands.
Yep.
Have you ever been there?
I've been by there.
Yeah.
That is an abandoned mine land issue,
Right.
but our Water Resource Division is more heavily engaged with the details of that and seeking solutions for the gay stamp sands.
Is there a
issue.
plan to move forward at any time, do you think?
Sure.
I'm stepping into territory I'm a little dangerous
Sure.
on here, Representative. There's certainly been a ton of work to assess the scope of that issue and potential ways to move forward with addressing it.
Sure.
I don't know that I can point to you to an issue with a larger scope from like an environmental perspective in the state. The sheer volume of stamp sands, I haven't been there, but I've had stories told me you're standing on 10 feet on the beach of stamp sand sitting on that beach, and that also has filled that whole bay, gone over historic whitefish spawning grounds. There's copper in that material, right? And that's
There is,
not good for aquatic life. That's one of the big reasons it's an issue. So some of the numbers that I have heard from the Army Corps study that was done, who are kind of leading the way, but we're very intimately involved. I know some of the tribes up there are very involved. DNR is involved with us. I think EPA has some involvement too. I mean, we're talking numbers that start with a B, not with an M,
Right.
And even the solution itself, right? What it looks like, whether it's a landfill up on top of the hill there on the peninsula or something that's kind of right adjacent to the water. It's really tremendous. I think we worked with Representative Cambenzi a couple years ago on an appropriation to start the process on what's essentially the first step in that entire process, which is some design and engineering related to a pier that would need to be built to start to tackle and dredge some of
Yeah,
those.
build the piers to stop the migration.
Yep. So I know our folks up there up north. It used to be Steve Casey who was great. They're moving forward with that work, but even the construction of that pier is a $60 million price tag just to get started. So big numbers,
Yeah.
big problem.
Thank you
yeah.
both. Thank you.
Any other questions? Director, could you tell me a little bit about Michigan applying for the Class 6 program and, how long that takes and maybe what we could do internally to speed up that process?
So last year, we received that $1.8 or $1.9 million grant from EPA to pursue a Class 6 program. As you know, there was CCUS language up in the Senate in the end of the last session. That's an authorizing legislation. ultimately, the state of Michigan can't apply for primacy to do that regulatory oversight from EPA unless there's a state program authorizing us to do that. Right now, it's dual regulated. The EPA has their Class 6 program. They're the Class 6 administrator. And then we also would regulate those wells under Part 625 mineral wells. So to answer your question, one thing that the department is doing is we intend to spend that money this year because we are allowed to spend it even before that authorizing legislation. By all indications, it seems like that's the direction we want to go. We have a lot of work to do in terms of getting administrative rule ready for that, and then also the actual preparation of the primacy application, which has to include a letter from the governor. It has to include a letter from the attorney general saying we have the regulatory authority to run the program. The program description in that is huge, that describes our program, and then you have to have appendices that have your enacted or codified regulations that support that. So that's work that we can do to get moving on that. And I don't know that there's anything that you need to do to support that. We intend to do that and keep that work moving this year. And we're ready to work with stakeholders on what that authorizing legislation looks like.
So maybe just to lay it out linearly for you, Mr. Chairman. Got the appropriation from the legislature last year after the feds gave us the grant. That lets us start moving it forward. Authorizing legislation, which Adam and then I think Sydney Hart snuck in. You all know Sydney, our legislative liaison. They're working with stakeholders, and I expect the legislature on that. Promulgation of administrative rules to further flesh that out. And then the primacy application that pulls all of that together. Submitted to EPA, and that'll have to get approved. Sometimes that itself takes time. I think we've seen some primacy applications to EPA take, a year plus,
Yep.
but that's something we'll keep moving down that road.
The legislative approach that was in those bills last session would have us adopting the federal regulation. So when you look at the Class 6 requirements, the crosswalk on that is about 100 pages, that may have 5 to 10 federal requirements on each of those pages. So our intent in that legislation was to adopt the federal program, those requirements, and that should make obtaining primacy a little easier from the crosswalk standpoint because you are adopting that. But then you have to have clarifying rules around that, and there was language specific in that legislation that addressed things that the federal program doesn't address, like pore space, liability, any number of those things. But we're hearing from folks that are, the 45Q tax credits that are available to companies developing these projects. These projects need to be started in the early 2030s. And they're available for 12 years currently under the program. So project developers are looking at that. They're looking at the backlog of permitting timeframes at EPA. They're looking at our progress towards primacy. And, EPA, by all indications, they're in the mode of issuing primacy to states. They've issued it to multiple states. They issued it to West Virginia just this last month. So to the extent that we're getting this work done, things come together, I would anticipate that best case scenario, it's 6 months to a year, working through with EPA. If we've got all our ducks in a row and we're having open and honest conversations with them in good faith, getting good feedback. All indications are that we will get that. We've met with them last fall even on this. They know that our intent is to pursue primacy, and we know what we got to do to get there.
West Virginia has a working program 6 right now.
Yep, they were just awarded that within the last few weeks.
Okay, excellent. One more question for you. How much does it cost to cap a orphan well, approximately? I know every site's different, but just a ballpark.
Yeah, that can vary. If a well has been active up until recently, there's things that you may know about the hole, and things aren't stuck in the hole, Paraffin's not locked up the tubing, so I won't go into the details, but like one that's been working lately, you can plug those for anywhere from $20,000 a piece for those Antrim wells, and that can run up into the $150,000 range. Now, when you're dealing with older orphans, that you don't maybe have the same understanding of what's happened to that well bore, it's sat for a long time, it may, and then you have on top of that maybe some access issues. Do you have that slide? Yeah. Apologize. We've been jamming a little bit, but just this last year with that formula grant, this is about a $2 million project, and this is in the Grand Rapids, Otto County area in a park. There was 2 orphan wells out in this gravel pit lake that got disturbed by ice or something. They had been previously plugged, but they were disturbed, compromised, and we were able to use this federal funding. But this is an example of, that was about $1 million per well. So access can play a lot into that, setting a cellar through 10 to 15 feet of water and ending up cutting them off at the base of a lake is obviously, this is the extreme situation. We can run into a nightmare well that can be between 3 and 5, but most can be done between that $200,000 and $100,000 range. Just a decade ago, our average was about $76,000 a well.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Rep Price.
Thank you for sharing approximate costs for plugging the well. I'm curious about what are the associated costs if we don't plug the wells? I'm on public health, so that's part of what motivates my question.
Yeah, I mean, spill prevention and avoiding cleanup. I mean, cleanup's expensive, so not addressing it, that's a bit of unknown. And frankly, we shared our frustration with Department of Interior about the time it's taken to clear these wells, because we had an orphan well in northern Michigan that's on that list, and we weren't able to plug as many wells as, you know, because we're having trouble clearing these. And with extreme weather, we had a valve fail, and it sprayed oil on the ground, and it wasn't that it was a terrible release, but it was very visible on white snow, like a 10-foot spray of oil. And we shared that with the Department of Interior, we'd like to get plugging these wells, and they understood that. So, but there is an indeterminate risk and cost that's potentially much, much higher as they sit. That's the importance of the program.
Another question, Rep? Nope, anybody? Rep Steckloff? Nope, okay. All right, thank you, Director. I appreciate you sharing the important work you do on behalf of the state of Michigan. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Travis. Okay. There's no absent members today, so I guess there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.